much like you do with anything in life, right? Like when you learn the skills to deal with an unexpected thing, like the more you do it, the more you're prepared to respond to it. And so, yeah, like there's all sorts that happens. Like I had a race in Lucerne one year where a pair crashed into the umpire launch. It's not a situation that anyone's ever experienced before, right? You've got to be able to respond to it on the spot and not like go, don't. And people are going, well, what's going on? Like you're not saying anything.
Hey, what is up? Welcome to Last Stroke Counts. We have another incredible guest back in the Leander Library. This time we're going to be speaking to a woman whose voice is very incredibly recognizable, especially if you've been following racing this summer. Henley Royal, Olympics, Paralympics, and recently World Beach Sprints Championships. Camilla Hadland-Horrocks, please welcome to the podcast. It's really nice to have you here.
Oh, no, great to be here. I feel like I see lots of clips of the podcast everywhere. So, yeah, thanks for inviting me on.
No, it was another easy pick. It was great, obviously, to be at Henley and kind of see a little bit of what you do and get involved in that. And it was awesome to sort of see behind the curtain. I think it's been interesting. We've spoken to Robert Tryon-Jones, we were just saying before as well, and that was really interesting. Sarah Winkless as well. And I think it's just another bit of the world of rowing that not all rowers know about or have seen. So that's really interesting to get into a bit of that and talk about what it's like, I guess, on the other side.
Yeah, exactly. And I think everyone's had very different routes into this seat, into this mic. So, I think my story will be very different to Robert's, to Sarah's, to a lot of other people. So, yeah, I think it's a very interesting part of the sport that I think a lot of us have ended up in accidentally, myself included.
And I think it's the similarities in rowing in that when you do it well, it looks really effortless. You don't get to see. There's so much work that goes into making it look effortless, and it's the same as rowing. And I think that's something that we kind of learned in this last year as well. So that's really interesting.
I was about to say, you've got first-hand experience now of what it's like to kind of jump in and pick up a mic for a few races. And
but we had like what we do. We were doing like a 45-minute slot and like a day to prep. So that felt like we did a good job. But it's like, imagine like having to do, like I can't imagine being at Worlds and having all of that to do as well.
A full week of racing, and you have to like remember the nuances from quarterfinals who had like a different lane and like have the conditions changed, things like that. There's just so much to like wrap your head around, and it's always easy to like point the finger at the commentator who's just made a mistake, like, oh, I'm a smart viewer, this commentator's just said something wrong. Well, you be live in front of 50,000 people and let's see how you do.
I like what you're saying, Pete. I feel like I'm like, give more sympathy to the commentators. You're both right. The Worlds is one of those things, and I'm sure we'll get into, more of the events later. But I think my first World Championships in 2019, I couldn't quite get over how tired I was by like day 2 of 8 days of racing. And you think, it's 8 days. There can't be that many more races to a World Cup, right? It's all the same people that are here versus what you'd get at Lucerne or you'd get at another World Cup. But actually, they're full days. You're racing 9 till 5 pretty much every day of those 8 days. And yeah, I just don't know where the races come from. But it is as intense as you think. And it's also trying not to use the same information time and time again when you've got the same people listening to their loved ones in the grandstands. They don't want to hear the same fact through that person's heat, repechage, semi-final, final, whatever else. So yeah, trying to get that variety as well. It's a lot to think about, but yeah.
Yeah, Pete's got a good fact about the calories burnt with chess players.
Yeah, I think they basically grandmasters when they're playing their few hour long matches at World Championships, etc. Like up in a day, they can burn as many calories as rowers will throughout the day just by like using their brain and focusing so much. Could be a couple thousand calories an hour.
I think that's what you said, like a couple thousand calories, like it's per match or something. Yeah,
no way.
The brain power is.
I really need to tell my body that. I need to like fuel it effectively in order to do that because I definitely don't prepare as if I'm about to go and do 6 hours of rowing when I've got a 6-hour commentary day, but maybe I should be because again, beach sprints a couple of weekends ago, where you're doing back-to-back 2-minute races where it's very high energy. The people that are, because it's knockout format straight away, you've got to kind of shuffle your prep round and you don't know who's racing in the next race necessarily. Yeah. So you've got to stay switched on the whole time. And that's a really tiring day.
That's the thing, like put yourself in like a sunny day. You've been a little bit dehydrated. You've eaten something sugary. So like you're kind of like hazed, and then like you need to be like on all the time. There's all these different informations flowing. People are trying to talk to you. You're trying to think about like how many words, how many different ways of like saying the same thing you can come up with. Be interesting. Obviously present yourself in a respectable manner and things like that. There's so much that goes into it.
Yeah, it's really a lot. It's a lot. We'll get into that more, I think, now, but we should definitely start at the beginning as we normally do and find out how you kind of found rowing as a sport in the first place.
Well, as you kind of alluded to, rowing and commentary are quite similar, and I've already said I got into commentary quite accidentally, and I guess rowing similarly. I'm sure you have a lot of guests that say the same thing, right? Is that rowing came across to me through a sort of matter of chance, in that I was never very sporty at school at all. I really detested sport, if I'm quite honest, all through kind of later primary school. And then when I started secondary school again, like sport wasn't really my thing. In sort of PE lessons and stuff, I was always that person that was kind of chucked in defence in hockey and just told to stand at the back and don't let the ball go anywhere. I wasn't the person running up and down the pitch. So that was kind of like my style when it came to sport. And then I had a friend who was in the year above me through primary school, who I was very good friends with. She'd started secondary school the year before me. And when I joined secondary school, she'd done like an indoor rowing course. Our local boat club, Stratford-upon-Avon Boat Club, which is from where I'm from at home, where my parents still live. They'd come into our school every Monday night and run a sort of dry indoor rowing course for the sort of for a second term, maybe, because I think I started in signed up in the December, my first like term at school in year 7. Then in term 2, like sort of January through April, did the indoor rowing course. And then the motivation was that if you went to this after school club every Monday night on the indoor rowing machine and you know, your attendance was good and you kept going, that you'd get a trial out on the water in April when it was nicer weather and you could get out, in sort of, you know, big tugboats to give it a go. Mm-hmm. So, I got into it through going to those after school clubs. I got picked up by one of the sort of older rowing coaches who was president of the boat club for a lot of the time that I've been rowing. Sadly, he's passed away, Felix. But he'd kind of said, "Oh, you're actually quite good at this." I'd sort of sat down, started pushing quite hard. And my sort of numbers, even in the relay, you know, we do like fun relays and that kind of thing. And I hated the fact that with every time that you weren't on the rowing machine, so we only have 2 to split between like the 8 to 10 people that were in this sort of after school rowing club. If you weren't on the rowing machine, you had to do loops around the sports hall jogging. And that almost put me off. Like I was almost nailing the coffin for rowing, like session 2, because it involved running, and I was like, no thank you,
I need to sit down.
Not for me. But I kept going because I kept getting told that my scores were very good on the rowing machine, so I kind of put up with the running to keep going with the indoor rowing stuff. And I ended up that April going out on the water, absolutely loving it, despite falling in so much. I think one of my nicknames through my like junior rowing was Queen of the Atlantis, because I'd fallen in like 7 times in my first full year of rowing. So it didn't start out it involved running. I fell in a lot. It doesn't sound like it was a great start, but actually I had a lot of encouragement and a lot of support from like the coaches at Stratford-upon-Avon, who were amazing. I got entered for what was then the British Indoor Rowing Championships when I was in year 8 in my second year of rowing. And I came away by, I can't even remember whether it was that year or the year after. It was like 2006, maybe. I won Brick as a junior, which was like the kind of start of my, okay, I love this sport, I'm going to carry on. I wasn't quite there out in the single yet. I was still falling in and hadn't won my first regatta and all sorts, but I was still in the water more than I was on it. But yeah, that's kind of how I came to rowing. So it's sort of school adjacent, I guess, in that my school didn't row, but I had a very enthusiastic local club who, still absolutely love, and shout out to Stratford-upon-Avon. I know that they're very proud as well of Esme Booth, who's just come back from the Olympics, another fellow Stratford-upon-Avon Boat Club alumni. So they're a great club.
Awesome. That sounds awesome. I've always said anyone who enjoys the ergo first, you're like, oh, wait till we get you on the water. Like, that's like a great sign. If you
They were like, it's dark outside. It might be February. You're on this old kind of grotty, I can't even remember what model it was, but the black ones that were like wooden handles with, like it wasn't even like a nice ergo, looking back at the time, but sucked through that, and here I am.
Yeah, I also remember the day that a foot specialist told me I shouldn't be doing any running, and I got to go back to my club and be like, I'm not allowed to run anymore.
No more running for me.
I did the same. I was like, I'd like got a new pair of trainers or something on a J16 rowing camp, and it had like hurt my back, and I was like, oh, whoops, sorry, it looks like I can't do the 5k run. I'll sit here, it's fine.
I'll do it on the rowing machine, no problem. Let me just try that.
Fine.
I never even used to try on the run. Like, I so hated it. I'd be like absolutely back of the pack. I just didn't care. And my rowing coach knew exactly how to get me. He was like, listen, Tom, I know you don't like running that much, but one year we went to junior trials and Dorney Lake was frozen, so they did a timed 5k.
Oh man.
So if you want to row for GB, you better get it. And then straight away I was like, boom, right.
Well, that was it, because I remember that from going through all the sort of, talent ID, those like J16 camps that they used to do at Nottingham and the trial, April trials and things back in the day when you did the sort of go and stay away in the Nottingham accommodation and do your junior trials there. Back in those days, that was me. I was that old. But
what year?
So I would have been trialing in like 2008, 9, 10 as a junior.
I was like 6 and 7. I did like what was the spring assessments? Oh my god,
spring assessments, the pairs matrix, and like
just like about 34 seat races a day for 4 days in a row,
and it was always boiling hot. It was always that time when spring and Easter was like 35 degrees, and you were doing like 15 seat races back to back. And they would always on those sort of development camps do an ergo. I want to say it was like a 30 rate 20 or something like along those lines. And they would set the runoff in like reverse order. So the people who were really good at the ergo would go off first, but they were often the people that were really slow at running. So they would get overtaken by all the little sort of light springy people that would come from the back and overtake on the run. So it was always one of those things where you'd be like, oh gosh, I'm setting off first, but I'm probably going to finish last. So good memories, good memories.
So then you said obviously getting involved on these start camps and stuff. So rowing started getting quite serious for you, just even at school.
Yeah, I ended up I stayed with Stratford for a little while until I was maybe J16. Had the fun times of doing the home international regatta. I did HIR in 2009, I think it was. When I was a J16. Yeah, that was right.
Fun.
So that was really fun. Yeah. And it was in Nottingham, which was probably like we were all gunning for the Cork, trip to Cork or whatever. But no, we were the Nottingham year. And had a really good time, made a lot of friends through that I still keep in touch with, still see at Henley, to this day that I bump into, which is great. And there were then a couple of us that went on from that HIR event to go to Junior Worlds the next year. So ended up staying kind of in the trialing system. Stratford's a very tough place, I think, to train when you're a junior, because it's a smaller club. It's got a 750 meter stretch of water with a right angle bend in the middle and a chain ferry on it, and swans and rowing boats and canal boats. So it's not the place that you're plowing up and down doing 20k.
Definitely can't switch off when you're in the middle of a session. You've got to be like alert all the time.
The amount of times I've like bashed canal boats, ended up sort of like, I hope Peter's not listening. I was also bashing swans, and it's crashing into weeds. It really sort of, teaches your boatmanship and your skills from that point of view. But not very good for building engines that can just plow on for miles and miles. So ended up kind of creating a bit of a link with what was the very, very early days of Gloucester Hartpury, which now obviously exists as Hartpury College. But back in 2010, Hartpury weren't rowing. It was sort of a very tiny little seed brainchild of Tom Pachitsis, who you probably know now was coaching the women's double at the Olympics. So Becky and Matilda, and also some of the beach sprint team. So Tom was one of the very early coaches at Hartpury. And so I'd ended up training at Gloucester, which is about an hour's drive from me. My poor parents were like dropping me every Wednesday afternoon and at the weekends to go and do all these miles with other girls that were in sort of West Midlands area.
Yeah.
Because we'd all come from like smaller clubs like Evesham Rowing Club, Gloucester. So we all kind of trained together in singles, and I eventually got to the point where I was selected for the Junior Women's 8 in 2010, and that was in Rachitse, the Junior Worlds that year. And yeah, we won the Junior Worlds. We were the first women's crew ever at a Junior Worlds from Great Britain to win a gold medal, which was very cool.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so which was a bit of a like wild. It feels like forever ago, right? It's 14 years ago now, but at the time, it was one of the sort of pivotal moments of the changes that came, I think, for GB and age group rowing as a whole. The fact that we'd never ever secured a junior women's gold medal at that point is crazy. The under 23 women had won in the women's 8.
The year before.
The year.
I was...
The year before, in Rachitse in 2009. Yeah, of course.
Yeah. We got bronze in the men's 8 and the women got the gold, which is awesome. Yeah.
Yes. So we'd kind of done that back to back. And yeah, it was a really cool experience. We had so many like well wishes from lots of the kind of senior female rowers that had come before us at the time. So I remember really vividly, meeting the Battens. So like Gwen and Miriam, and a few of the like Sarah. So yeah, we'd had loads of congratulations through that, and we were coached by Ryan Domain, who's still currently coaching at Headington.
Still talks about that to this day.
It was a really special moment, and I think that given how successful we are now, and we're still winning the Junior Women's 8, or we did for the second time ever back in Paris last year, that was super emotional. I got to commentate on that race. 13 years later, which was very cool, and still kind of Ryan involved in that. I know Bodo Schulenberg was kind of the lead coach of the boat, but Ryan had definitely still been involved. Yeah. So yeah, it's kind of this like lasting legacy that's continued, and it's been really nice to watch.
You could have you can almost like say it was the start of something good in the GB, especially like with the junior women's squad, like the way that you've seen them go on the rise and everything after that. But like, even for you personally, that must have been incredible to go from like we all have an identity that we like associate with, and we tell ourselves, I'm not good at sport, I'm not good at this, like I hate PE, to then like just a few short years later, you're a world champion. Like that must have been a total, I don't know, like a mind mess. Like how did you even unpack that?
It's crazy to think now that I'd ever have considered my identity not to be a rower. Like I cannot remember a time before I've been like the rower, which I was at school through that time period. And yeah, it's changed me as a person, right? I'm sat here today for that reason. And sport as a whole, I think does amazing things for people. And for me, I owe a lot of my not only sport choices and sport kind of results through, not only that Junior Worlds result, but the sort of role that I do today within commentary. I owe that to that experience that I had as a junior and looking back now, but also like other things in life. Like I wouldn't have gone to the university I went to, or I think even being the job that I'm in sort of professionally, if it wasn't for everything that confidence boost, that like motivation to keep going to achieve that result and more. And it didn't come without its knocks. And I'm always a little bit reserved sometimes talking about it, because having been sort of told that it was never going to happen, and that we just don't send 8s to the Junior World Championships. And then, I was kind of like the last seat into the boat, and it was always like, oh, am I even supposed to be here? I'm not even sure I'm good enough for this. Like I've always kind of had those question marks the whole way through. And then I went to university, and you suddenly then become like the fresher that it doesn't matter what's happened beforehand. Yeah. You start again, right? Like you're no longer that person that's presumed to be at the top of the pile from like small club, or even the top end of that sort of junior trialing system. And I was kind of, it was really tough. Like I was kind of coached out of even thinking about that being an achievement. Like it was very much kind of like coached out of me that like I should put that to one side and not think about that or recognize that, which I found really hard to get my head out of. So yeah, it's been really weird when I think it comes up because my brain kind of automatically goes, oh yeah, but that was like 14 years ago.
That didn't
that didn't happen. Like I'm not a very good, like, I'm not an international rower. Like I would never call myself as such, but people are like, but you won the junior world championships. But yeah, I think it had kind of then just been slowly coached out of me.
I think that's such a common trait of high performers.
Yeah.
Is to put down all our achievements and be like, well, yeah, I kind of was, but I wasn't. And I did that, but I didn't do that.
It doesn't matter now. It doesn't count. It's been so long ago.
And I think also, yeah, it's a difficult tightrope to walk in terms of being proud of your achievements, but not letting them get in the way. And like you said, like maybe that was wrong for you. I remember one time, you know, after I'd come out of juniors, I was in a mixed crew. A couple of us just out of juniors, one out of uni, one was doing something else. Had a completely crap row, and the coach was like, "Come on, this isn't juniors anymore. This isn't university rowing. This is senior rowing." But I remember that almost in like a positive way, like, "Oh, okay, right. You know, we were where we were, and now we need to step up." But you can get it wrong.
Yeah, and also I think when you're going into a university program that at the time, like Durham had such a reputation going in 2011.
Did you choose Durham because of rowing?
Yeah, I did. I'd been on one of the Durham kind of sculling camps, rowing camps, a couple of years before I applied. And so I'd sort of seen the university. I knew that from an academic perspective, that's kind of where I was aiming for. It was a nice city, town. Like, lovely, you know, I sort of really clicked with it. And so I was like, yep, this is where I want to go. But yeah, I think when you're walking into a program that had been at the top of its game, you know, all through that 2000s period, winning those Victor Durham, sending numerous people to the under 23s. Yeah, it was a big reset. And it was the first time for a lot of people, right? First year of university, you live away from home. You're sort of trying to navigate all of these new things yourself. And yeah, it kind of knocked me a little bit. My first year at university, I'd say wasn't my most enjoyable rowing year of all time. And I'd been a 1 year junior. So I'd had like a year to stew, where I'd kind of trialed a little bit, but then was like, oh, I need to do my A-levels and actually get into university. Mm-hmm. So like, I'll, you know, do some stuff on the side, do a national schools project, do whatever. But yeah, I was so young that for me, and I wasn't like one of the top juniors. So that big step to under 23, I was very realistic that probably wasn't going to happen for me in that year in between, you know, my junior year and uni. So yeah, it was very challenging, but you're right. Like, I think it affects different people in different ways. Some people see it as a really big challenge. I think for me, like, I was trying to deal with so many things. And I knew what I wanted to do, but I think, yeah, just that sort of bit of a talking to where people have been like, look, you need to forget that this ever happened. Like, you're not that person. You know, just don't talk about it. Like, you don't talk about that here. You're here to make a university first date.
I guess from a coach's perspective, like, I can kind of understand that you don't want athletes just like walking around with their chins up thinking like they're the best in the world, even though if they rightfully earned that and things like that, because you're trying to create a team atmosphere or, you know, push some humility into them, teach them like core values of the university program that they're in right now. And obviously it's tough because everyone just like becomes a number once you're in that big university system. And I guess if you're a big name like Durham, especially that it was at the time, you're trying to mold everyone into the shape that you're trying to, of what you're trying to achieve with your club. So I can kind of understand that, but also like, as a coach, you do need to communicate to your athletes that it is important to be proud of what you've done. And like, yeah, you shouldn't let that affect your ego too much, but you should definitely use that as fuel and motivation and a foundation to step on from.
Yeah, you don't want to train the belief out of someone, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. Because I think it was kind of like, with this like weird fallow year that I'd had in between that and then coming to university, I'd almost kind of like then been like, oh, right, like, can I even ever get back there again? So yeah, it was challenging, but my second and third years were much better. Like, I had a really good time. I had a really good coach, during my second and third years, and it was excellent. So, and yeah, shout out to Durham. I think they're still excellent. And
Fletcher's back.
Fletcher's back. So no, I'm actually going up there in a few weeks' time we do an Olympic dinner, every 4 years, which I've been going to since I was a fresher in 2012. Yeah. Well, no, I'd have been in second year, but yeah, which is cool. So I went to the London one, the Rio one, and then Yeah.
Well, your name and your legacy is still very much up there. We were at Durham University just a few weeks ago, and I just saw a little photo of you in the crew. I think from Bucks or somewhere, like on the wall still. So like, then sent you a photo, see, do you recognize this spot and things like that. So it's good to stay in touch with your alumni and like reconnect like that. So it's definitely like, it must feel like an old home when you go back there.
But time passes so quickly, and I think about like, I was at university 2 minutes ago, and actually I'm like now thinking about when I was at uni and graduating in 2014, I am to the new students the same as somebody who graduated in 2004, which like in my brain, I'm like, no, that's not true. Like I think about the people that graduated in 2004 when I was at Durham, and I'm like, oh, like they were all old and adults and had jobs, and like they were so far away from where I am right now. And I can't quite believe that that's me. So yeah, it's good to be close to it. But also I feel like it's been a very long time.
Yeah.
The other day, I think it was a friend of mine's kid who said that they were born in like 2007, and I was like, "Oh, yeah, it's like the year I left school." Shit.
And you're like, "That's almost." They're almost 20.
Yeah,
you know?
it's like a
they're like 17.
Like
yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah.
Well, they'll be able to drink next year, buy cigarettes. Obviously, don't, but things like that. It's insane.
It's wild. Yeah, it doesn't time. Yeah, time just keeps flying. Yeah.
We saw a little video. It was going around the internet, and it said like it was talking to basically a bunch of freshers at universities and things like that. It's like, what year would you have to have been born in to be considered old? And someone said like anything pre-2000. You're like really past it. And I was like, what?
You're like, ow,
ouch, no. Us 90s babies.
I'm 89. I was at Beach Prince on Saturday at Home Country's Beach Prince.
Oh, cool.
We were talking about this.
How did you find it, by the way?
So this is the first Beach Prince I've been to.
Are you converted?
It was really good weather. It was
Okay.
like sunny. Apparently they had like 8-foot swell the day before and 50 mile an hour forecast the day after, which had like this flat thing. Sunny.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it was good fun.
Nice.
It's cool. 2.5 minutes is a good length for a race. It wasn't too like, there wasn't much jeopardy because it was quite flat, but I guess that made it a bit more fair. But yeah, it's good. So I've been involved with the Welsh team on the lake rowing side of things. So
Pond dipping.
gone to pond dipping. So been going down there to see that go on was quite cool. But yeah, I can imagine like how much conditions and things can vary can be crazy. But in terms of being a spectator sport, I definitely think it ticks the boxes.
Yeah, I'm really excited for it to kind of keep going.
Yeah, it's so new as well, isn't it? That's the thing.
It has so far to go. Like, it's so new.
Like I was like, oh, I don't really know what's going on. Like, so what's going on? And then literally everyone I asked that question to would be like, yeah, we don't really know what's going on either. Like, hang on, you're the coach. Yeah, but
yeah, we just have to kind of try this, and people are going to have to, right? People are going to have to. It's funny because I was at the World Beach Prince, like you mentioned, in Genoa a few weeks ago, and I went for dinner with some of our team on one of the nights, and one of the cool things they have at the World Beach Sprints is they have a DJ who they bring in, who does like he essentially like live mixes when people sprint, and he like matches the pace and the rhythm. He's incredible. Like
What?
DJ Koval, amazing. So they've brought him in from sailing. So he does sail GP. He was a sailor. He was an Olympic silver medalist sailor. And he was saying, we were at this dinner, and he was like, I still feel like there's like loads of missed tricks here that people are just not cottoning on to. He's like, because as a sailor, and one of the other commentators who's never rowed, but a sailor, you know, so can read the waves really well, read the conditions, who commentates on the beach sprints. He was like, even stuff to do with like the equipment, the way that these people are actually reading what's going on underneath the water versus the wind versus, he was like, there's just so much to gain. Even small bits that people can be thinking about with the boat manufacturing, with whether people have got these types of fins or these types of fins, and like how much weight that you can add or take out of the boat depending on the. So he was like, from a sailing brain, he was like, this is amazing, and at the moment it is just the bare bones of what it could be when it becomes like everyone's scrapping for those extra little bits when we get to LA in 2028.
So in terms of tactics and strategy, it's free real estate out there, a bit of a wild west.
I was kind of, it made me chuckle because watching people do the turn around the buoy, like doing like a quick turn and thinking like, since I was like 14, like, you know, it's been like, who can turn the fastest?
Yeah.
But it's never meant anything.
60s.
Yeah, it's never meant anything. And like now you're like, no, that could win you a medal at the Olympics.
And it was
That's
amazing at Genoa watching, again, you talk about the conditions making such a big impact. Maybe not so much in calmer conditions, but watching people at the Worlds then sort of doing, you know, they were making the same mistakes coming in towards the beach. They were getting, you know, pushed onto a bit of land, or they were missing the beach by, you know, 100 meters and having to sprint a lot further, but people consistently making the same mistakes. And we were like, you know, why has no one said to them, you know, when you've turned the buoy, you should do this, or that you're being pushed off the buoy on this station, or if you get the choice of lane, you should go for this lane with your particular style. And maybe that was happening, but it was more difficult to coach. But yeah, there's definitely a lot more to it than just sort of like who can turn quick. There's a lot more on top of that as well, which is really cool.
Exactly. That's only one part of it. Yeah, there was different. You can kind of have, we were talking about you're allowed to get pushed off. The people who push you off are allowed to be a certain depth. So some, like the Scottish team, were like full on like launching and just going straight in the water to push and just coming up like, but like that's a little extra there and a little bit here, and it's fun.
And that can either like help or hinder. Like some people we watched getting pushed, and actually like they were being pushed right into an oncoming wave because it was just timed really badly, and it meant that the person in the boat, especially if they were in a solo, were getting like thrown out of the boat, or they were losing their blades. So actually they probably didn't need the push if they'd have just like held on to them for a bit longer and like released them safely. So it's so fast and it's so quick, and it relies on you making decisions and judgment calls like split second in the moment far more than flat water rowing does, which I think is really interesting.
Could it be any different from like the rowing that we're used to? Because you'll have athletes almost like doing a 2K course and you're told to like switch off your brain, just work as hard as you can, you know, just like do the same thing over and over. Don't think too much, just like read the boat. Versus like you said, beach swings, you've got to be quick, on your feet, thinking, analysing, turn here, wave here, lane there, things like that. Yeah,
and even switching off the part of your brain. There were so many instances I've seen over the years where going slower to go faster actually would have gotten a better result for a crew. So like when you've got beaches where there's quite high swells or quite big waves coming into the beach, you know how you get the sort of peaks and troughs. And if you're on a peak and riding the crest of a wave like a surfer, your speed picks up, you get absolutely catapulted into the beach. But if you miss that, you end up in a trough. And if you're pushing as hard as you can and rowing really quickly and trying to, you know, try and push through, you actually end up kind of rowing in a bit of treacle. And the best thing to do is actually just kind of like slow down a little bit and wait for the wave behind you to catch you, to push you even further rather than fighting against it. And I think a lot of flat water rowers find that a really difficult concept is like, if I stop and just like take a bit of time to like assess what I'm doing, what's going on around me, where I am, have a look in towards the beach, make sure I'm lined up, make sure I'm ready. It's like a completely foreign concept to them.
Yeah, which I think is why you get coastal rowers, much smaller coastal rowers, running rings around some big lake rowers, which is quite funny to see how like, being the biggest isn't necessarily the best when it comes to like reading the waves and those kind of things, like watermanship or whatever it's called.
Yeah.
So going back to your story, I guess, finishing up uni at Durham, did you want to keep rowing? Did you leave it there? Was that enough for you? What were you thinking in terms of your rowing?
So when I was in my final year at Durham, I was trying to finish a degree,
That's the bit we always forget.
Yeah.
There's an actual...
I was like, I was trying to get a degree.
Yeah.
I was president of Durham that year. So I decided to take more on, in my third year, like a lot of people do, and then trying to trial for the under 23s. And I feel like all three of those things are quite big things. But I'd gained a lot of confidence at Durham. I remember really vividly, sort of aspiring really randomly. Carl Hudspeth was one of those people that I'd seen at Oxford, who was president of Oxford in the year that I was, in my final year at Durham. And yeah, he was president doing the boat race. And I think doing like an engineering degree or a medicine degree or something silly like that. And you know, when you see people doing that kind of thing, and I'm like, if they can do it, then I can absolutely do this. Myself.
Yeah.
And I remember having a chat with Wade Horcrux, if you don't know, head coach at Durham at the time for a very long time. And a lot of people know Wade, infamous. And Wade was always a great mentor to me, actually. Like, you know, I sort of built over my 3 years quite a good relationship to the point where when I was president, he really looked out for me and actually was a really good person to sort of help me with trying to prioritize. And I remember having this conversation with him when he went, "Are you sure you can do all this?" And I went, "Well, this person's doing all of this thing." Carl Hudspeth's listening, he's going to be like, "I don't even know who this person is." Like, they idolize me. But it was just a really vivid thing that I was like, this person is doing a lot more than I am. I can definitely give this a go. And I think I'm a bit like that in life now, right? I take on a lot because I want to prove I can do a lot and that nothing is ever too much. And that if I enjoy something and I want to do it, I'll do it. And I think I maybe just took the step a little bit too far in trying to do all of these things. I ended up I was kind of like in the under 23 for a lot of the sort of summer racing, like did the Met in the under 23. I was like training at Caversham for the few weeks leading up to. And then I got a rib stress fracture. I raced Henley Women's with a stress fractured rib, and I remember going in to see the doctor at Caversham and them just being like, "Yeah, you probably shouldn't be rowing." And it was like a toss up between me and another girl, for sort of the last seat in the 8. And just with a few factors, they'd said, "Look, you're in your last year. This other person's in their first year. Like, you've got this rib stress fracture. We probably think that it's best that we take this other person because it's just a bit more reliable and actually, you know, gives them a bit more experience." And I was really upset at the time. And I'd had a really hard slog of a year, and I'd actually achieved a lot. You know, I'd set a PB on my 2K that year. My PB was my ergo was one of the faster ones through the trialing system, which was great. I got a 6:57, which was my fastest, which, you know, at the time, 10 years ago, I know that things have moved on. Things jump really quick.
That's still very, very good for under 23.
Thank you.
Especially 10 years ago.
10 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. You know, there were still some girls on the sculling side and maybe a couple of the other top sweep girls that were doing like sub 650, or lower 650s. But I was still very pleased that I was still up there. But I know ergs don't float, and I was pleased with a lot of my achievements through that year, and the presidency had gone well from my point of view. I'd hope that other people who rode with me at Durham would say the same. I still have a really good relationship with them, and there's still a lot of them my friends today. So yeah, looking back, I actually achieved a lot through that year. But yeah, I was so upset by the under 23s thing that I never wanted to look at rowing ever again. And I was like, that's it. This is me done. Like, I'm finishing university and I don't know what I'm going to do next, but it's not rowing. Because I just sort of thought, well, if I can't make the under 23s in my final year at university, going as fast as I think I can go at this point, having put a full-time sort of stint in effectively, I can't see myself being the risk taker to go and bank on doing like a, you know, interim year at Leander or whatever else, trying to find a side job. I was just like, this would take a monumental effort to catch up to the people who are already making the under 23s and making the top boats, who are already going to struggle to make the senior team and beyond. And so I made a kind of judgment call at that point where I went, well, I think that's it for me when it comes to rowing. Like, had a great time. I've been rowing for a really long time now. I'm going to step away. But my now husband, was going up to Edinburgh for a master's. I sort of coached the Durham freshers for a bit. When I left university, like I was coaching in the beginner program. So I stayed on for a bit of a fourth year. Eventually made the choice to move up to Edinburgh, to join my partner who, he was rowing at Edinburgh Uni, who were just on the up at the time. Like, that was kind of their time to shine. And so I was like, I could maybe dabble. Like Edinburgh doing pretty well. Like I'll sort of turn up to some of their land sessions. I did a bit of erging. I then sort of was recreationally rowing with St Andrew Boat Club for a little bit in Edinburgh. So that was fun. Did women's head with them after a few years.
Was Chalky there at the time?
Sorry?
Was Chalky there at the time?
Chalky, yeah, he was. How do you know Chalky?
We're going to go and do their eggs. We do Edinburgh. Yeah, we do Edinburgh eggs.
The KG, the big old Urquhart. Yeah.
DKG, yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, so we were in the Edinburgh Boathouse and Chalky walks in. I was like, am Mike around there? No. Okay, well, I'm just going to stick around for a chat anyway. So proceeded to talk to us.
Chalky's great. Chalky was there when I was at St Andrews. So, yeah.
Yeah, we do Edinburgh and St Andrews Uni. I'm hopefully going to go back and do St Andrews Boat Club at some point. Yeah, I mean, I always sort of think, like, some people, I guess, I had to like walk away from it or whatever. I just generally think like rowing's a sport about finding your limit. And I have so much respect for people that understand when they found it. And I was probably one of the people that didn't quite get it, And I think, I've always had like the most respect for people that like know when it's time to walk away. And like to be like, that was my limit. That's where I pushed. That's where the injury started coming in. Cool, I'm done with it. And I'm happy with it. And it's a hard thing to do. But like you look back and go like, I made the right choice.
Yeah, 100%. And I'd have never found commentating if it wasn't for doing that. Who knows what, I may not have even been still kind of in touch with rowing as a sport if I'd have carried on and driven to hating it. I don't know.
There's so many people that try and make that extra step and then leave the sport completely jaded because it gets harder.
Because they've just spent so long consistently on that, like, halfway house between, a full-time athlete at Caversham and being, a sort of high performance club or university that like
scraping by because you've only got, a job in the coffee shop and it's a tough existence. You've got to be all in, you've got to be all in. And you know what? It will work for the 1 out of 20 people that they have as an intake every year. If you were to look at the squad now on both sides, like to identify the number of people that made that jump via coming through like a sort of interim year somewhere, there'll be a handful of them, but I don't think it's the antidote, is it, to securing a spot on the team. And actually, you're right. Like if you've got the guts to go for it and to go all in, it's a very hard place to fall from, and you can fall multiple years, time after time, and never know when to actually just draw a line under it because you get so close. But yeah, I watch people do it and it is challenging, but I'm really pleased that, I stepped away when I did. I
guess also like you had prospects outside of rowing that you wanted to do with your life, like you had a career in mind or other things that you wanted to do. It wasn't just rowing and nothing else. I think I saw a crazy stat the other day. Not sure if it applies to all sport or just basketball, but it says that only 26% of athletes get to choose when to walk away from the sport. Huh. Like, so if you are the one that made that decision, you're in a lucky group. Yeah.
Good stats. Good stats.
I guess we should now find out then how you got into commentating. It's quite a good story.
Yeah. I mean, it's actually in bits. When I tell it in short, you'll hear me give the same answer about like my first commentary, my first proper commentary being at Bucks Regatta, which is kind of in part true, but actually it was a little bit more.
We want the full exclusive last for account story.
It was a little bit more kind of progressive than that, I guess. So weirdly, I actually got into commentary very, very first when I was still at Stratford-upon-Avon, when I was a junior. There was a guy who was at one of the other West Midlands clubs, Evesham, who we'd go to Evesham Regatta every year as juniors. So I must have been maybe like J14 or 15 because I was still racing with Stratford rather than going off and doing trialling stuff. And this guy, Robin Walker, who had commentated at the 2006 Dorney Worlds, was a commentated on the local regattas, did a few of the like Brit champs and things at the time, had kind of, well known in the region. I think I was maybe chatting to him after having like won a regatta or like picked up a pot somewhere, and he was like, "You've got a really nice voice." And I was like, "Oh, thanks." And he was like, "Oh, have you ever thought about do you want to come and give commentary a try?" And I was like, sure. I was, maybe like 14 or 15. And he was commentating at Evesham Regatta. And I remember that the commentary was done in the tea tent of the VIP tent. So it was kind of like sort of like bunting on a square in the ground that there was like a micro, like a handheld mic. And he was like, why don't you come and just give this a go? Like, just stand here when you're not racing. And it was on the finish line. So I had a start list. I had him going like, okay, like, give this a go. So I sort of called a few races at that point. And he was like, great. Like, if you want to do more of this, just let me know. So I was doing a bit of rowing, obviously kind of continuing on with my junior racing. And then he also commentated at, do you guys know the Ball Cup? Have you ever come across the Ball Cup? No. I feel like it's one of these regattas I feel like I've made up in my head that like no one else has ever seen or heard of it. I'm like, the Ball Cup. So there's a Ball Cup North and a Ball Cup South. And the Ball Cup South is at Dorney in May, and it's for J12s and 13s. And it's a 1K regatta at Dorney for like schools and anyway, there's a big long history to it, but the Ball Cup happens at Dorney.
It exists, yeah.
It exists.
Okay.
You can look it up.
Well, not that many people row before 14, which is probably why not a lot of people don't know about it.
Yeah.
The main contenders are like the Dragon School and like, local random schools that have picked up rowing. So he was like, you should come and do this. It's a multi-lane event at Dorney. Like, you get to be the finish tower at Dorney, which is obviously being built and prepped for the Olympics at this point, on the run up to 2012. This is pre-London. This is Dorney
cool.
Pre-London 2012. So, gave that a go, sort of was like, great, this is good. So we kept in touch, but by that point, I then kind of focused on rowing, didn't really commentate very much. I maybe did one stint at the British Rowing Junior Championships, I think. I got put on a rota and went to Nottingham for the day. But I would never have called myself a commentator at this point. Like, I'd done like 2 or 3 stints on a mic, and then went to university. Obviously didn't do anything at university. It was just like full on rowing, like from late sixth form up through university. And then when I finished at Durham and I went to move up to Edinburgh, I got a message from somebody, I think I want to say it was like James Lee or someone who runs Bucks. And they were like, oh, look, we know that you've done a little bit of commentating before at the British Rowing Junior Champs and whatever. Any chance you'd be interested in coming and doing Bucks? Because our main commentator is at a wedding for the whole weekend on Bank Holiday weekend in May, and we don't have any commentators. So do you fancy it? And I was like, sure, yeah, I'm coming down anyway because my partner was racing, and so he, I was like, oh, you can come watch him travel down with Edinburgh. Like, it was very easy. So yeah, I'll sign up. So I came down to realize that it was basically just me. I think it was like me and maybe like one other person who was sort of there for one day. And Bucks, I don't know if you guys have ever been to Bucks. No, when I talk about the World Championships being mental, like Bucks is chaos. It's racing like 7:30 a.m. until 8 p.m. for 3 days straight with barely any breaks. It is madness. And so that was my like introduction into having to try and commentate consistently for 3 days on the trot, like without, you don't have tons of information on everyone. Luckily, having just left uni, it was a lot of people I knew and had raced against, or, so I was just chatting about my friends for like 3 days, which was great. Like, I really enjoyed it because you're just sort of like, oh, I know this about these people, and I know these people have done this, and I know these people have done that. And it was people that had, won at the under 23s, or people that had done whatever. So yeah, it was fun. And that was my kind of first main event. And after that, the people who are on the organising committee for Bucks, there's a couple of people who are actually stewards of Henley Royal. So Andy Crawford is one of them. So was kind of one of the Bucks committee members at that point. And I remember really vividly, him tapping on the window of the commentary booth at Nottingham, sticking his head through the window and going, Camilla, will you be coming to Henley Royal Regatta? And I was like, I don't know, mate, probably. Like, I come for fun every year, usually. Like, I camp at Swiss Farm and I come and have a good time. So I was like, yeah, probably. And he was like, okay, good to know. And so, like, he disappeared. And I sort of, like, didn't really think too much of it. I signed up to do Henley Women's commentary for the first time that year, like, the first ever time. And then I got this email I was at work at my desk in my recruitment consultant job straight out of university. And I get this email through on my phone and all I see is Sir Steve Redgrave. And I was like, cool. Like, I opened this email and it was a letter inviting me to be part of the first commentary team for the Henley Royal broadcast in 2015, because that was the first year that they streamed anything. And so I'd had this like sort of personal letter saying, look, we know that you've commentated at the university championships. Like, would you be interested in being part of the commentary team for the regatta in the first year that we're broadcasting it? And I thought, I was like, I had to read it about 5 times, and I sort of like left my desk at work and went, is this, I don't really know. It's short, maybe. Yes.
This is spam.
Is this spam? Like, is someone pulling my leg? But no, it was totally real. And yeah, ended up sort of getting my break at Henley Royal that year, as one of the co-coms, like you guys did this year.
So you went from 0 to 100, like really, really quickly.
Yeah, super quickly.
There's also, like now a lot of regattas, you can listen in, it's broadcast. But back then, so Bucks, you would have just been doing like the venue commentary. And then you've just gone from venue commentary Bucks to I'm going to be on YouTube. Yeah, pretty much. And again, I feel like this has happened like numerous times throughout my commentary career, where it's been like, I'm just doing these things, I really enjoy it, and then suddenly it's like, boom, okay, you're doing the Olympics, and I'm like, oh, hang on, I've only just done this for like a year. So yeah, there's been a lot of like big, very flattering and lovely surprises. But yeah, that was the first big one that was great, like that I'd gone from chatting about my mates at uni doing rowing to, hey, you could be talking about anyone doing anything.
That's crazy. And also, like, this is a very good hack for anyone getting into commentary. If you can talk about your mates, do it. Because, like, if you're commentating for like 8 or 10 hours, you're going to make it interesting for yourself. Otherwise, it's just going to like burn out so quickly.
That's something interesting when we were talking about parallels, that you were like, oh, I was just enjoying doing this thing. And then all of a sudden I was like on this big stage doing it. And I'm like, that's exactly what we talk about, like process, not outcome driven. Like, you're not going to get to Olympics because you're like, oh, I want to go to Olympics. You're going to get there because you're like, I love rowing and I'm going to put everything into it every day.
Tom, I could not agree with you more. I think a lot of people will ask me, how do I get onto the commentary team for Henley Royal? How do I do what you do at World Rowing? Like, can I come and commentate on like the World Rowing Champs or the Olympics or whatever? And I know that I feel like a lot of this has happened accidentally to me, and I really want to help other people to do similar. But I also feel like there's a lot under the surface that like also you guys know this, right? It's a big high pressured job to do, and you've got to do the 3 hours. You've got to love it and do the 3 hours, right? Of like finding your own accommodation, like that 3 days in Nottingham that I did at Bucks. It was like I'd had to pay my way on the minibus. I'd had to find some accommodation that I'd paid for myself on my like measly graduate salary, like a walk away. I remember like messaging someone that I knew that canoed, that lived near, because the canoe centres in Nottingham, was like, hey, can I come stay on your sofa? So it was a lot of that, which I still did for a long time after that, right? Like, I didn't just stop. I wasn't just like, oh, hey, like I've been invited onto the Henley team. Like, cool, that's me.
Yeah, I'm a big
but I think that there was still a lot of like giving time to rowing and like doing it because I loved it, and doing a lot of like volunteering at events that it looks like it was just like a sudden thing, but every event, there's still a sense of like jeopardy, right? Like if you mess it up, like it's a very cutthroat. It's like any freelancing, right? Like if you mess it up, they don't have to invite you back, right? Like you don't have to have you.
Yeah.
So it's scary, even in the first stages of like getting these things. But like if you truly love it, these opportunities, it feels a bit like luck, but they will come to you if you genuinely love it and you put the time in because you love it. Like it will start it'll start happening, and people will notice it.
It's just like rowing, you know. It's like, well, how did you get good at rowing? Well, I took a stroke 1,000,000 times.
Yeah.
How'd you get good at commentary? Like, you got to be on the mic and just talk. And that's a good point. Like, to start with, it's not even just doing it for free. It's paying to do it.
Yeah.
Because it costs you to get this stuff set up and get there and get it done. But yeah, no, you got to really enjoy it. I wanted to ask, what about it is it that you love?
Oh, I'm like, I could be here all night. For me, the thing I love about commentary is there are so many people that watch this sport because they love it, right? And they want to be as close to the action as possible. And people train for like you say, years and years to be in the position to race that race. And to have that privileged position to be able to sit alongside not only like when you're in one race, you know, let's say I'm racing one race, one boat type at the World Championships, you do your heat, you do your semi, you do your final, you do those 3 races. And that's your combination and that's your experience of like getting to that point. I am lucky enough that I get to do that with every single person that comes down that track. I get to be part of their experience of whatever that is for that person, right? Whether it be the Olympic final or whether that be, you know, their first Tuesday race at Henley or whether that be, you know, racing at Bucks for the first time as a beginner. To be in a position, there are very few positions in this sport where you can do that, I think, where like you can be really in it with every single race, and commentary absolutely is one of those where you get to throw yourself into every race as much as a coach or an athlete, or even more so than a coach or even more so than an athlete, because you do it over and over again. Like you get that like sense of being like, this is really special to someone somewhere and to me, like to be part of this. And like creating those memories of like, I don't know if it's the same for you guys. Like I always feel very attached to something when I've been part of it. Like, and just even looking back at some of those like classic races and amazing moments, to like know that you've worked hard to be a part of that and like done it all the justice that you can. Like it feels really cool to be part of that kind of history.
Yeah, so I completely agree with you on this, where you're even probably more involved than the coaches who are just watching their crew and just stressing about the result. They're thinking about the prep. Meanwhile, when you're commentating, you have to be taking into account every single aspect of the race. How are the waves? How are the conditions? Where are they? Is this crew doing a push? How are they responding? What are the tactics? Is there anything going on in the crowds, or like what's about to happen? You have to also sometimes eat your words when you like make some false predictions, the commentators' curses and things like that. But like that's what makes it so fascinating, exactly, because you get all of the adrenaline from racing without actually having to race. I think, Tom, you mentioned that you had that effect.
Yeah, like I never thought I'd be at Henley again and have like pre-race nerves. And this year, like getting ready for the commentary slot was like thumping. It's like it's really high energy, and you come out the back end of it just buzzing as well. Like there's no way you like just like absolutely buzzing. Like it's super high energy. Like just being that much in it in the minute, like every second, like having a brain race 100 miles an hour at Henley as well, having potentially a director in your ear saying something. The screen in front of you is cutting between different angles. There's you're constantly trying to balance understanding that there are parents watching who might know nothing about rowing, so you want to explain a little bit about, you know, maybe why the blade is feathering and squaring, but you don't want to go into too much detail because that will bore the people that know all about those things.
Yeah.
So there's just this tightrope that you're walking the whole time, and then it's just trying to like put all those things together. I think it's funny to say it, but it's similar, like trying to put that perfect race plan together. It's like trying to get all those elements right and do it all right and do it justice and not mess up. And you're so judgmental on yourself, just like being in a rowing boat. You take one bad stroke, you're pissed off at yourself. It's like, oh, I already said absolutely already.
Yeah.
And then you've got that in your head and you're like, damn it, I've said absolutely twice. And like, I'm sat next to Martin Cross, so like, definitely don't say the Martin Cross word that he always, and it's very stressful and difficult. And again, like, I guess with rowing, like it's a lot of the enjoyment I get from rowing is like when it's over, it's like, oh, I did it. I faced it. I faced the fear. I got it right. I dealt with the pressure.
Yeah.
That's it for me, I guess.
And it never goes away. Like it never goes away, right? Like I feel like there's an immense pressure, I think, a lot to do that race justice. Because again, like, I don't know whether you've ever watched racing, not just in rowing, but in any of the sport, where you feel like frustrated that the commentators aren't picking up on something that you're seeing, or like that they're not like sort of delivering the moment as you pictured it in your mind. And you get the same when you're trying to prepare for that, right? I sit down, especially before like big races, whether that be like finals day at Henley or, you know, the games, and just to think like, how will this person's friends, family, everything, like, what will do them justice, like, and what is it that I want them to feel when they're listening to this? Like, I want them to be able to like enjoy it, and I want to enjoy it as much as they're enjoying it as well.
There's so many different aspects of exactly the emotions that you have to take into consideration that you're trying to portray. There's different types of people that you're speaking to whilst you're commentating. You have to prepare information on the crew. So if you're skilled enough, like experienced commentators, they'll read in from like the brain or from the booklet, as races are coming along. And then, like you said, Tom, you can have the most perfect race plan. 10 strokes into the race, boom, there's a crash. And then suddenly, like, all of that goes out of the window. And you're live on air, and you're like, what's happening now?
I really felt for Matt Britton and Adrian Cassidy during the grand final this year at Henley, right? Like, you've spent like hours prepping for this race that you know is going to be an epic race, that you really want to deliver justice to, that there's sort of like, I know you're always kind of expecting the unexpected in some ways, but with a race like that, you know, that's not the kind of unexpected that you're planning for, when that crash with the booms happened with Washington. And it's, you know, you heard it in Adrian's voice, it's disappointing. Like, you feel like you've prepared all of this stuff that then kind of goes to waste. And, you've still got to keep your composure, and you've still got to like find a way to make that a story and make it interesting. And there's this real temptation in any race, right? Like, if you've spent the time preparing, this was something I had to let go of really hard when I like got more and more so into commentating, was like writing reams and reams of notes on every single race that I was going to commentate on, and having to, as the race was coming down in front of me and it not going the way that I'd like planned for it to go, and I prepared all these lovely words about this person that was in like 5th and not qualifying, to be like, I'm just going to park that. Like, it doesn't matter that I really want to say it. And if the moment comes and something happens and I can say it, it's there. But like, I think for me, what I've come to realize is that like, you've got to talk to the race in front of you. You've got to, your prep notes are an aid, right? Like, they are there to reach for. If you like they're there to aid the story of what's going on in front of you. They're not there to force into what you're seeing. And it's so difficult to do.
Yeah. I kind of learned that on this, like doing this, like, and I said already, you know, with Pete before, that like, there's no way I would have had the confidence to go and do the Henley commentary. We did a little bit of Met, as like a warm up, but in general, it was this that kind of made me confident, and like having to do that thing of thinking while you're talking, hearing someone say something, and then thinking, oh, I've got a great. So I did a day earlier when you were talking about Wade. I was like, it's not anymore because he's not on the scene. But anyone would be like, oh, do you know the Durham coach Wade? And then someone would go, no. And you go, you know the guy who's always in shorts? And they'd be like,
yeah, that guy.
And then so it was in my head, but then the moment passed, and I was like, okay, well, like I got it in anyway.
You still got it in, and the moment came, so it's all fine.
Things like that, when you're just like, that was a good one, but things have moved on. You like keeping the flow, working with someone else, like trying to bounce off Pete and things like that.
That's the thing. Like, even in commentary, you might have the perfect thing to say, and as the moment arises, the cameras are showing it. You've got just the thing, but you're the commentators talking, and you just got to let them. You know,
and having really good roles established. Like, you'll have learned this through the Henley Royal commentary, right? And that changes depending on which event you're at. But having a good lead whose role is very, very different to a co-commentator, like being able to sit in those roles and know what you're there to do.
So here's a question for you: were you always a lead commentator, or did you start off as co-commentator for Henley? And if yes, how did you find the transition from being the support to sort of like leading the show, because it's a very, very different sort of framework of how you even like portraying the race, how you're narrating. You have to almost tell a story to the viewers, versus as a co, you can sort of like rely a bit more on the facts or on the analytics, or you've got the time when, for example, when I was commentating with you, you would talk about, you know, where we are in the race, like sort of coming up to halfway and this and that. So I'm just like looking at blade work. Okay, next thing, techniques coming up. Maybe there's a push, trying to like look at the pain and the grimaces and things like that. So those are two very, very different roles.
Yeah, they are two very different styles. And I did start as a co. So I'll come on to that. But I guess for people who aren't as familiar with broadcasting, we tend to, in pairings of commentary, it's a little bit different for like on-course commentary or whatever, but if you're hearing a broadcast with two people, one person's often assigned as the lead commentator, and their role is essentially to guide the conversation, like to think of them as kind of like the narrator of the story, right? Like their role is to introduce, to kind of go through whatever the start list would be, to then kind of just make sure that you're keeping it on track of like, where are we at? What's important about this? You know, what would the result mean? And to wrap up at the end, right? So sort of bookend it and make it that product that if nothing else existed, you'd know where you were, who was winning, without any of the bells and whistles.
Yeah.
The co-commentator's job is to be the expert, is to add the bells and whistles, right? Like if you were to just have kind of like, you know, a plain cake, that's the lead's job, is to make sure that you've got all the ingredients, they're added in the right order, and it comes out at the end looking like a cake. Whereas the co-commentator's job is to make sure that like it's explained well, there's all the sort of sprinkles on top, the candles are there to make it like, what is it about this race that's making that boat go fast? What is it that's important about this crew? What do we know about them? To kind of bring it to life a little bit more than, because every race would sound exactly the same almost if like a lead commentator, you know, they obviously can slip into the role of a co and do it all in one, but it's much better when you've got that sort of expert inverted commas role next to you who's able to fill in those gaps, fill in that space between the bookends of like, this is the color, this is why, you know, I think this boat's moving really well. And the lead does a lot more prompting. It's a lot more about being a bit of a question master, of like sort of identifying where that person maybe wants to go with something, or just giving them like a wide open space to like, for you to just stop talking and like hand it over to give them the sort of runway of what it is that they want to talk about. And I think that as people are starting as co's, having somebody who can ask you really good pointed questions to give, because some people are like, I wouldn't even know what to say when you say I'm a commentator. Like, I wouldn't even know what to say. And so it's giving, you know, new co's like, hey, let's talk about this, or like, what do you think about that? And how do you think this is happening? Or why would this crew do this?
Yeah, it's a skillful thing. You did it quite well when we were on Matt Britton as well. It's essentially asking a question you know your commentator has the answer to. And like, that's like really smooth. Never
dropping them in it. Yeah, because it is hard, right? To strike that balance. And I think for me, it's always about just those open questions, like just letting them decide where they want to go with it, rather than being like, what's the gearing on this boat? Tell us more about this. It's like, you know, I don't even know the answer to that question. So why would I drop someone else in it? Whereas a nice sort of like, hey, what would you do in this position? You've been an athlete, like you're down by 3/4 of a length at the barrier. Like, where would you go from here? If you were that Cox, what would you be saying? Like that's all kind of stuff that you can answer personally without having to know more about the crew and the boat. So
and different people have different like abilities, like just you saying on that, remember it, like Cam Nichol's great at that, like in the mind of the athlete.
Yeah, he is. Love commentating for me. We were Cam squared.
That's the thing, like, you could also tell that you guys have worked together, because then you kind of know where he's going to go with it, so you can kind of, and then it really flows. And
Cam and I are like we're like the two extroverted, like bouncing off the walls. Like you listen to any of our Henley commentary, we're like, yeah, like, oh yeah, and you know, yes, excellent. Like it's also very high energy. But to answer your question about transitioning from a co into a lead, for me, the co role was never, weirdly, it was never as comfortable for me, because often the leads at the time that I was coing were people who knew a lot more about rowing than I did, right? Like my first co jobs were with Gary Herbert and Martin Cross, and Mark Hunter was my lead for a lot of time. And these are all people that knew a lot more about rowing in a Henley final. Like, I'd never rowed at Henley Roll Regatta.
I asked you that live on air, actually.
Never rowed at Henley Roll Regatta. And so there's a lot of people out there that know a lot more than I do about what it's like.
And maybe a few years ago.
To be, and so it's, I think when I sort of transitioned into the lead role after working with Mark Hunter, actually, and Mark kind of turned to me off air after our first stint a few years ago, maybe like 3 years ago now, couple of years ago. And he went, do you know what, Camilla, like, I think you'd be far more comfortable in the role that I'm in. Because he's like, I just like chatting and like adding colour. And you're quite good at asking really good questions. So why don't we just like swap? Why don't we just swap whilst we're like doing this session and see how it goes? Like, why don't you do the introductions? Why don't you like finish off the races and like, let's see how that works. And so I kind of got a bit of a taste for it at that point. And he was absolutely right. Like, I was far more comfortable like asking someone else, like, what do you think about this? And guiding. And again, through doing more world rowing stuff, I've gotten a lot more comfortable at things like pronunciations, which I think as a lead, you got to take the front foot in being really confident with that kind of thing. Otherwise, your co-'s sat there looking at you, you're looking at the co going, I don't know what that's going to say, and if I'm not confident in saying it, then how am I to expect someone who is quite new to commentary to give that a go? So yeah.
Mark's such a legend, isn't he?
Yeah.
Mark's great.
Smooth operator.
Thank you, Mark.
Oh, we need to get him on. I swear, I fixed a row machine for his dad, Terry, the other day. And he said, we had Rossi on, which was obviously great. But Mark Hunter would be great.
Definitely. I mean, it's so fun, like working, learning and even like anticipating how all of your other like commentators that you're working in pairings with work differently. So some will like to throw you a curveball and then you're kind of just like, oh no, I need to think of an answer, but I also need to sound compendious. I think what really comes across later when you like listen back to your recording is that your nerves that you're feeling internally, they don't really come out like that in the final product. So like every night after finishing the Henley commentary we'd listen back to like our whole sessions and be like, cool, video analysis, like what can we do better? I like that. I like this.
That. A bit of review, a bit of feedback.
Yeah,
It's
definitely.
always important. It's good.
Yeah. So like, oh, this was absolutely 7 times in a row. Let's not do that again.
Counting the same words and stuff.
Everyone does that.
Yeah.
Everyone does that. So it's...
We've got quite, again, another
It's a
thing
thing.
that's come from rowing, isn't it? Self-analysis. And it's what we do with even, we spend a lot of time driving around to and from jobs. So even on the way back from jobs, we did that well, or we could have done that quicker, or if we'd swapped that job and if you'd done those 2 jobs. So it's just something that comes naturally. But yeah, I mean, we've talked a lot about Henley and I think there's a lot of people that know maybe a lot about Henley racing, and like someone who's involved in schoolboy rowing knows everything about schoolboy rowing. Or have to know a lot about what's going on with Henley, but then also on the world stage, Henley's only 2 lanes. We're talking about 6-lane racing. Hear you on Junior Rowing News, like you know everything about everything. It feels like you know everything about everything. Is it pure passion for rowing, or is it pure passion for like nailing the job and kind of like that becomes the part of it?
I think it's a bit of a blend of both, Tom. It's a good question because I'm like, it's all a ruse. I don't know that much about rowing. Again, I'm gonna put out a disclaimer. There are a lot more people that know a lot more about rowing than I do. But
Yeah.
no, there are. Like there are some people I speak to who their brains just like can remember so much stuff. I think for me, it is a passion project. Like I enjoy watching rowing. I always have. It's one of the sports. Again, having not been very sporty at school, I didn't watch a lot of sport. And again, I think importantly, being a female, there's not that much sport where you watch role models, right? When I was growing up, there wasn't that much women's sport on television, so you're not really brought up. My dad watched rugby and cricket. I'm still, relatively into rugby. My other half now works in F1, so like I'm into that and into most sport. But like, rowing was the thing that I really associated with, so it became the sport I watched as well as the sport that I was involved in. So I think that sticks and that rings true. That like I enjoy it and I watch it much like I would watch any other sport, like I would watch the Six Nations or anything else. But also, there are things that you do have to kind of force yourself to read around when it's, a new format or a format that you're maybe not quite as familiar with. Like I do the World Indoors every year, for instance, right? Like I wouldn't, despite my love for the ergo, as I've already said, the for me, that's not the kind of part of the sport that I follow very much. Like I'm not into CrossFit. I don't follow like the World Indoor Games or anything like that. So for me, that's quite a lot of, like, I have to work quite hard to get into the nuts and bolts of that, to know who the players are, to sort of get into the guts of what's an important story and why we should be bringing certain people certain things. And that it is hard work, right? It's hard work to, like anything with any job, right? Do your prep, to be able to reach for something when you're put under pressure, which, you know, we had circumstances at the indoors, I think last year, 12 months ago, where we were sort of on a break for 40 minutes because they had a technical problem with one of the sort of ergo races. And so they were like, right, cool, we've got a few VTs, but you're filling for 40 minutes. And so you've got to be in a position as like a host or a lead commentator to then go, right, 40 minutes. I've got two people here to chat with. And what are we going to chat about for 40 minutes off the cuff that other people are going to be interested in tuning into or watching back? And so, yeah, that's the kind of preparation, I guess, that you have to have on hand. There isn't necessarily the fun, like, oh, this person's parents won the Olympics, or, you know, this person has a really interesting job outside of rowing, and let's bring that to life. Like, that's all lovely, but there's actually more like reading and understanding that you need to kind of get into it. And again, sometimes I slip up, right? Like the beach sprints, for instance, a few weeks ago, I'm still like a little bit like, I have to have the rule book up on my laptop, like the World Rowing rule books. I'm like, how many boat handlers are they allowed to have? Like, I'm like, I've only just started, like, I only really just started learning this sport, right? I don't know it as well as I know a sport that I've done for a really long time, that I've been there and I've done it. So yeah, it's still homework. There are still elements of it that aren't I just know it because I know it. Yeah. There's bits that you kind of just need to graft and learn to. Yeah.
Have you had moments when you like really prepped for a race and then you did it live and then you absolutely nailed it, and then like driving back, you were like feeling so proud of yourself, like listen back to that. Do you have any like memories of like the race that you're particularly proud of, like just absolutely smashing out of the park with your commentary?
So frustratingly, I think it's one that's probably not recorded. So at the Olympics this summer, I've now done 2 games. The first games in Tokyo was obviously a bit of a weird one. I think I was quite nervous for a lot of the finals because it's kind of what you can't quite believe that you're sat up there. We were doing car commentary in Tokyo, and you're sat literally on the start line with the Olympic final.
Oh, so you didn't do it remotely?
You're one of like 3 people that's like there.
Yeah.
And it was insane. Like, it was like any other rowing race, but you're like, this is the, like, I am with my own eyes watching these people on the start line about to start their Olympic final, which is insane. But in Paris, I'd, you know, obviously got a few more years of experience of commentating, done a lot more work through the World Cups and through like the various World Championships and things. And I feel like I was a very different commentator this year. And I'd really prepared well for my finals. Like, I knew ahead of time, like, which finals I would be doing versus Peter O'Hanlon was there with me, and he was the other commentator. So we sort of, at the beginning of the week, we went, right, who wants these finals? Who wants these finals? Like, let's split them. So we split the research for the week. And the final I was most proud of was the women's single scull final. So I'd had this real like thought that was like, if Florijn wins it for the Netherlands, like, her brother's just won this week, her father won, you know, 30 years ago, I think it was like 28 years ago or something. And I was like, right, I don't want to jinx this, but I'm going to prepare a sort of like mini script for if this happens, like just bullet points,
as it comes to the finish line,
so that like I could time it as she came into the line of like the last 10 strokes. And it, like, as it was coming into the last 100 meters, I was like, she's going to win this. So like, I've got my thing, I'm ready. And so I just had this like, I was just so pleased that I'd like prepared this again with that thought in mind of what would her family and friends love to hear as she comes in to become an Olympic champion. And like, I think it was something like, you know, like her brother 3 days ago and her father 28 years ago, Caroline Florijn will become an Olympic champion in a women's single sculls, and like, you know, sort of with various other bits. But yeah, like, you know, when you like put the mic down, I was like, I didn't fluff it. Like, I didn't fluff any words up. Like, I'd done my homework. It just, like, it felt like a really nice, like, I think it was actually my last race I commentated as well. So like, I put the mic down and was like, that's it. Like, I've done it. So yeah, that was, I think for me, like, I know it's maybe probably recency bias. Like, there are other races I remember from previous that were really nice, but yeah, I think that one for me is probably
that's such a cool story.
That's awesome. And I think that's what makes you like such a great commentator, is like exactly what you said. Like, you already were thinking about what her friends and family would have wanted to listen to, and you thought of that ahead of time and you prepared that thing for them. And it's just, yeah, you definitely, as a commentator, I've followed your commentary in World Rowing before I even like met you this year, and I didn't know that it was you personally doing it, but like, you've definitely got a knack for storytelling and like making races interesting, and like you said, like providing like a frame of reference that even if you were to listen back to like a standalone product, you know exactly what's happening. So this year, in preparation for Henley Regatta, I was like cycling up and down the bank, just like watching some crews preparing for summer race in Oxford. And I had some old Henley commentary races in my headphones. And I was just trying to basically pick up on the voice cues and like how the races are evolving from start to finish, which things to say, etc. And then I would watch them back and then see if what I thought was happening. So like, it really is a skill. And like, I think it goes down really quite underappreciated. So that's something that I wanted to like ask, like, how often do you just drive back from your job or something, or like on the train and thinking, okay, I'm going to do like a prep race in my head. Like, you imagine there's like a final Brooks versus Neerhouse or Brooks v Leander in a grand or something like that, and you just try and like go over like certain things. Or do you ever like make up scenarios in your head like that?
I probably don't make up scenarios in my head as much. I'd say that I think about it. Do you know what was really good prep for this, actually? When I did my World Rowing audition back in 2018, they gave you 2 random clips and went, you need to commentate with no sound over the top of these 2 clips. And like, I didn't know what was coming in one of them, because it was like I want to say it was like a CD semi-final for like the lightweight men's single sculls in Sarasota. So like, not a race that you'd have like tuned into, like a big climactic race where you couldn't think, like, what would happen. So yeah, exactly. So that like, how much research did you do around these people, and like, how prepared were you for what was to happen? And somebody capsized, you know, not something that you'd expect at the Worlds. And so I was like, oh, this kind of thing can happen. And what I tend to do is I listen to other people doing, like, other commentators, and how they respond and deal with those situations, or have nice turns of phrases for things, either whether that be like the other commentators at Henley or World Rowing commentators, or even other sport commentators. And I like listen to bits that I hear and I go, oh, that's a really nice way of putting that. And like, that's a really nice phrase. Or like, still with pride, right? Like, obviously don't use it identically as that person would do, but just like taking bits where I'm like, that's a really nice way to approach that, much like you do with anything in life, right? Like, when you learn the skills to deal with an unexpected thing, like, the more you do it, the more you're prepared to respond to it. And so yeah, like, there's all sorts that happens. Like, I had a race in Lucerne one year where a pair crashed into the umpire launch, and like, obviously again, it's sort of then trying not to lodge your opinion, but trying to make sure that you bringing things clearly to the audience. And it's not a situation that anyone's ever experienced before, right? You've got to be able to respond to it on the spot and not like go, don't, and people are going, well, what's going on? Like, you're not saying anything. So it's just learning those basic skills of like, okay, like, how do other people deal with like intense situations? Like, do they take a pause and just go, these are the facts, and then we'll bring you some opinion later? Like, that tends to be how I deal with like unexpected things, is like, pause, cut, have a think about it, have a look, say what I see, and then think about like, okay, how do we bring opinion to this later than bringing opinion to it first? Or
if you're working with a co-commentator, just throw the question to them. Like, so what do you think is happening?
Hey, why don't you deal with this instead of me? I'll remember that one for next time, guys. Next time we're working together, I'll be like, you guys love capsizes, right?
How many events will you have done in this last sort of rowing season?
Great question, Tom. I don't think I even thought about it myself this year because it's been so many. So
that's what I'm thinking. Him saying, "Oh, do you ever practice?" I was like, "She's never not on the mic."
I did it when I'm not commentating. So this year I did the World Indoors in February. I did Bucks in May, which is still my like passion. I still keep going. I love Bucks.
Cool.
I did World Cup 2 and 3. So I did Lucerne and Poznan. I did. What else have I done? Henley Women's, Henley Royal, the Olympics, the Paralympics, and the beach sprints. And then I'm about to head to head of the Charles, which is exciting. Oh, nice. So, yeah, a few events this year. Oh, and I sometimes do. I can't remember if this year I've done any boat race stuff. I maybe did trial 8s in December. Yeah, I sometimes do some of the stuff for the boat race trial 8s and the kind of lead up matches. Too.
Any favourites stand out from those? Like, are there any events outside of Bucks, obviously, that like you really found?
Bucks is like, always number one, Pete. Okay. Like, we love Bucks. No, any standouts from those this year? I mean, it would be hard for me not to say Paris. Overall, as an experience, it was really cool for there to be full grandstands, to see a lot of people who had gone through an Olympic cycle last time round with no, like including us, no crowds, no one there to sort of welcome them home, to it being completely flipped on its head. And Paris almost feeling, I know a lot of people have said this, but I would also testify that like it had a bit of a London 2012 feeling about it. Like everyone really bought into it. The city was awesome. The rowing was like full pretty much every day. It was just a really cool, like I think multi-sport games or of any description are always really good fun because there's a sense of like it taking over the city, like Munich, which we did a couple of years ago for the Europeans. That was really cool. But yeah, like it felt like it was a long time coming. It felt like it had been in the works for a little while, and yeah, I think it was a great experience all around.
Awesome. How do you master the art of thinking while you're talking and still making sense and being really interesting enough so that people have no idea that you're doing that in the moment?
Practice. Practice. I liken it to when you're at work and you don't like presenting. You know how like when you're in a sort of corporate job and people hate standing up in front of people and presenting, and you're encouraged to go out and find opportunities to present, to get good at it and to present. For me, just doing it over and over again and like listening back to yourself over and over again and getting feedback from people who said, oh, actually you said this, but like, that's not that, it's this. And you know, I do still make mistakes where I say something that comes out of my mouth, it leaves my brain, leaves my mouth, and I go, no, that's not right. That didn't sound good. I've already said that 3 times. And you just have to kind of like take a pause, like not be afraid to take a pause, not be afraid to have a think. And again, just having the art of being able to talk about what's in front of you. And my other cheat, which a lot of people know about me, I feel like this isn't very much of a secret anymore because I've like told every person that I ever deal with, is I have like an adjectives book. I think must have shown this to you guys, right? Like I was about to say, I've shown every person that I've ever like talked to about my commentary.
Yeah, it's great, and we all copied it.
But it is like my biggest secret for like thinking on the spot, right? Because you do 20 races back to back, and you're like, I cannot for the 25th time say about how, you know, oh, this crew is rowing really smooth, and you're like, I've said smooth 25 times now. Like, I need to find another way of describing how nicely this crew's rowing. And I just have this book, which I've been adding to now for like years and years, where it used to be a little green book, but it's now developed. It's now it's a bit bigger, navy blue sort of leather notebook where I just keep adding words, which I'm like, oh, that word would be a nice way to describe the distance between crews, or like that word would be a really nice way to describe the impact that push has had on the race, or like, and even words as silly as it sounds, words like impact, agility, like I just write them down. And I know this sounds really silly because you're like, Camilla, is your vocabulary awful? Like, do you not know these words? But the difference it makes, having it on a piece of paper in front of you so that you don't have to spend that time processing your like internal brain dictionary to not say that same word over again and then stumble over your words. The difference is amazing, and it makes you seem like you've got this huge vocabulary that like people are like, wow, like you found a very different way to describe that race. How do you do all of these like walkovers, race after race after race on like, you know, the opening day of Henley or the opening day of the Worlds, like where there's massive gaps. And it is purely just, I have spent time writing down words that I will use in a day-to-day context, but when you're put under pressure and someone says like, give me a word that means speed, you're going to go, and every word that's ever meant speed has gone out of your brain and is 20 miles down the road. It's there and you can have it in front of you. It's not cheating because there's no rules. So I can do, if you can't tell what I'm doing, like, if it helps me and it gives a good product, like there's no rules about what I can and can't have in front of me. Like that's just the way I like to do it. So
yeah, that was a good tip. You gave me that tip. I think I was the first question I asked you. I had this year. I was just like, give me your best tip for commentary. And you said like, yeah, write down the list of objectives. And I did. And I still said absolutely like 7 times in a row.
Yeah, I think because people compare it to them be sat at home thinking, well, I could have thought of a different way to say it. But it's like, yeah, but you're not like right there.
Do you watch quiz shows?
Yeah. When you're like, oh, I'm amazing at this.
Right. Yeah. I watch Only Connect every Monday night, University Challenge, Mastermind. I'm like, I could definitely do this. Yeah. But you forget that like when you're actually in the seat, it's going out live on air and you've got all these people watching you that like you've only got a second to think about it. It's a bit like that.
Your brain will just wants the path of least resistance, so it'll just give you the one thing that you know. It gives you absolutely again. It will just give you the same thing again, and then you get like, I think it's called like the ugly sister syndrome, isn't it? Where
you guys have all these things. I'm like, wow, you're so knowledgeable.
You I can't think of an example how to do it, but like there's the word, and you can't quite think of the whole word because your brain's stuck on this similar word, and you're like, I know it's not this word, but I can't get to that one because I'm here.
All you can think about is the one word that you keep using.
Yeah, the wrong one.
It's like, don't think that thing where it's like, don't think of an elephant. And like, all you're thinking about is an elephant. But
you said the other day, you said like, if you're listening to like one of a song by an artist and then someone says, what's like another great hit by that person? It's like really difficult.
Like Popmaster, we used to do it. They play a song and they say, name one other song from this artist. And you're like, you want me to think of it while another song's on? No, it's horrible.
Yeah. That is exactly it.
Mixes
like,
you up. Yeah.
You just can't. So have it in front of you. It's not cheating.
Yeah, it's a good.
One of the few times in life that you can have all the answers in front of you and it's not.
It's not.
Yeah, that's the job.
But then the skill, I guess, is if you can have any piece of information in front of you, which bits do you choose? So it's learning the stuff that you want.
And you can choose to dump it all, right? Which isn't great commentary again. Like we were saying earlier on in this podcast, you can have all this stuff. And if I just sat and I read, 20 facts about each crew that's on the course, I'm not going to be telling you very much about the race. And you're like, oh my God, I can't even remember what that person's just told me because they've told me everything about everyone. So it's choosing the bits when it counts.
You'll probably like get bored yourself by the time you finish reading 20 facts in a row. Yeah. You just want to get back to the race. If you were to change like a thing about commentary or like improve a setup, because like you've done so many races in so many like different settings, probably worked with loads of like different mics and environments and things like that. Do you have anything that comes to mind?
I think we have a really long way to go. This is maybe not so much commentary related, but I guess kind of is we've got so far to go with graphics and rowing. Like I'm sure you guys will agree, right? And being at the beach sprints is something where we've got a really good opportunity to like bring that to life even more. And when you watch like a production that has a lot of budget, 'cause graphics are expensive. I came to learn when I shared a taxi to the airport in beach sprints with our graphics guy who was like, what did you think of the graphics? I went, this is great, but let's do this as well. And he was like, are you paying for that? And I was like, okay, no, maybe not. Turns out graphics are really expensive. But if you watched any like big sporting events where they've got like a bit of a budget for good graphics, I think it makes a real difference to the viewer at home who knows nothing much about that sport. And I think about what will bring more people into our sport of rowing is being relatable, like you say, to those people that have tuned in. You've got 30 seconds to capture their attention, a minute. it's one of however many sports they're flicking through on their TV while the Olympics is on. It's one of, however many sports that's on at the weekend. Like, how do you get that person immediately engaged? And I think for me, like, when I tune into a sport that I know nothing much about, it's those, like, it's the cool stats that you see, the percentages, why is this person quicker than this person? Why are they scoring more goals than this person?
Yeah.
Or why is this team better in attack than the other team? Like, it's that kind of thing that I feel like we can do as much as we can to talk about it. But ultimately, people love a visual prompt to be able to, like, actually fully understand it, because you've got to be very skilled to explain it. And even then, people don't necessarily remember it. Whereas you want those facts you can take to the pub, right? Like, I do that when I, like, look at, the stats again during the Six Nations or whatever. And I'm like, top try scorer of the tournament so far is this person. Like, I'm going to take that down and be like, isn't so-and-so having a great tournament? And I'll be like, yeah, like, it's that kind of thing where we just need, like, a little bit more sort of flash stuff to be like, this person has not lost a race in X amount of races, or like this, like those things that kind of like come up that you're like, yeah, that's what people want to go, oh yeah, like, I know something about rowing. And
to make you feel like you're part of it.
Yeah.
Friday of Henley, fastest time to the barrier so far. And then historically, how does that compare? Shipleg in Princess Elizabeth Challenge Cup in the first final in 26 years, etc., etc. Like, all those sorts of things. I can already see it.
Yeah, and it takes time. It's like anything, right? Like, you introduce things at drip pace because you don't want to invest a load of money into something that's going to keel over, and you want to get it right. So I think it's adding the bits that it's like building bit by bit to make the finished product.
I think it comes down to also like having like a really good and big and broad database full of all of those like little facts that you can bring out and really quickly access and sort of mold into the perfect drip feed of information for that particular moment. So no, I completely agree.
Yeah, definitely. It's been awesome to listen to and get even more into the backgrounds of it. Like I said, we had a little taste of it, but it's really cool to hear like how you do it. And yeah, you make it sound, same thing, you make it sound like it's just easier, just do it this way. But you can tell as well, these things that have taken years. It's still Pete's phrase of, what was it? You're an overnight success, 15 years in the making. That sort of thing. Yeah.
That's a phrase from The Founder, one of my favorite films of all time. Yeah.
I do have one question I want to ask. Do you meet people in rowing and you're talking to them and then they go, "Oh, I know who you are"? Do you get it a lot?
Yeah, I do. And it has been a really weird thing to get used to. And I can't remember which year it was, but there was one year at Henley. I feel like I'm always like, at Henley. It is one of my favorite events of all time. Soz Bucks, do love Bucks as well. But I have had people come over to me who've overheard me and been like, "Are you the commentator?" And often they won't know my name, or like it's again, you're not a face, are you? When you're in this job, you're very much a voice. And so I'll be talking to people and they're like, "Yeah, are you the commentator?" So it's been weird to get used to, because I've very much always been the person that knows a lot about other people. Like, when you sit there and you're like, "Oh, this person's never going to know who I am," but I actually know that they went to university here. They've been to 2 under-23 World Championships. They're now, doing their first senior work. Like, and they have not a Scooby who I am, but I will recognize their face because I have to for everything. But it is now starting to go as much the other way as...
It's a weird thing.
Yeah.
You had it at the River and Row Museum.
It was, So I was speaking to David Tanner. I was actually enticing him to come to the podcast, which we will be having him on quite soon. And then someone comes up to me whilst I'm in mid-conversation with David Tanner. I was like, "I recognize your voice. You do the podcast." And I was like, this is epic. Same thing happened when I was at Oxford City Royal Regatta. I went to order Diet Coke or a glass of water or something at the bar, post-race, let's say post-race, and then someone says like, "Oh, you're the guy that does the podcast," and I was just like, still can't really like believe it, like from the whole voice. Like, it must be quite funny if you're like in the pub chatting away with some friends, And then someone from the table next over was like, "Oi, turn this Henley commentary down." We're just trying to like have a nice conversation.
That's the
because they think like obviously they're watching the video or something.
The negative is I was at Henley qualifiers 2 years ago with the Henley Old Boys 8 that had managed to qualify for the Thames Cup.
Yes.
And we were having a chat and a couple of beers, and I was telling one of my, I was like, "This is a good running story I like to tell," and I was going to wheel it out, and they were like, "Yeah, we heard you tell that on the podcast." And I was like, "Oh man, everyone knows my good stories."
Yeah.
So yeah, I was like, damn it, I'm not going to have any left. Like, I haven't got any.
You just got to save them or make new ones.
Yeah,
Find new ones, I guess.
happening.
What were we like at Upper Thames, and we were speaking to shout out Meg Jackson, and then you were talking about like back injuries with her and things like that, and she was like, "Except you didn't have a back injury, you little this that." I've never really like spoken to her in detail or about my career or anything like this. She's like, "Yeah, but I heard it on the podcast."
Yeah,
I know.
She left, and you were thinking, "How does she know about?" Oh yeah, she watches the podcast.
Yeah. So,
well, I guess we've just got
quick fire
questions.
Oh my God. Okay.
They're quick to ask, not necessarily quick to answer. You can take as much time if you want.
We call them quick fires because they're basically set questions, and set questions sounds a bit boring. So it's quick fire. Out of all the rowing venues that you've trained at, raced at, visited or commentated at, what are some of your favourites and why?
Okay. Bled for me. Loved Bled. Went for the first time last year for the Europeans. I've heard it's not very nice to row on by all accounts, but to commentate, A-star. I was on a speedboat. It was excellent. Had a great time in Bled. And the reason I love Bled is because it's got all the beauty of Lucerne, but without the walking and the hills and the, however many trek to the course and the price tag. Like, it's a lot cheaper to eat out by the lake. And the start line is in the city. Like, it's in the town of Bled. It's so cool. So, like, there are not many rowing venues where you're in the town. You're often in the equivalent of Slough.
Yeah.
Around the world.
Yeah. Except for Poznan. Poznan's good.
Poznan's good. I like Poznan. I was in Poznan this year. Did enjoy that.
Rachice is not Prague.
Oh man, Rachice is not Prague. You can say that again. I've not been back to Rachice since 2010, but look, no offense to Rachice, but I feel like
I don't think anyone would take offense to you. To that place.
Yeah, and then I'm trying to think. Another really cool place. Hong Kong was amazing. So we did Hong Kong in 2019 for the World Rowing Coastal Championships. It was like my second coastals. And we'd done like a sort of dual header where we'd done beach sprints in Shenzhen in China and then like hopped across the border to Hong Kong. And the venue was the Royal Hong Kong Yacht Club, and it was awesome. Like, what a venue. Like the race took place in the harbour, like in the, like the channel between the island and like the Kowloon ferries crossing, and that's what created all the waves for the coastals. It was all the photos, if you go back and look, they've got like the big backdrop of like Hong Kong City, like the Ferris wheel and all the big buildings and the mountains. Yeah, what a venue. Like, that is definitely one of my favourite places I've been to when it comes to world rowing.
Amazing.
Cool. I like those answers. Yeah, definitely.
Hopefully a bit different to the usual ones.
Yeah.
Maybe Bled you'll have had. But Hong Kong, I feel, is a different one.
No, that's a good one.
Yeah. If you were to repeat one race or one event again when you're 60 or 70, what would it be and why? And then you could either have the same outcome or you could go back and change the outcome.
This is a really good question. Because I've got a really obvious one, which is my Junior Worlds final. I'd love to go back again.
Well, you just said you wouldn't want to go back to
No, I would. I'd love to. I'd absolutely love to. Because I feel like there's very few opportunities to do that kind of thing and like experience being a world champion. So I've only done it once. Would love to do it again. Yeah. Or can I make up a race?
Go on.
Because like we've already mentioned many times, not only today, but previously to you guys, I've never raced Henley Royal. So for me, if I could go back in time and the island could exist when I was at university at Durham, I would love to have done that. I don't know if that's a cheat answer, but like...
There are no wrong answers
I would love to have had the opportunity to race in an event that was designed for me at Henley at the peak of my career.
Question. So you race us Durham in the island. Do you race crews from back in the day, or do you race like modern day Brooks in the island? Because that's a different outcome as well.
100% racing the cruise from back in the day.
Are you beating Newcastle by 6 feet? Yeah.
Oh man, when I was in my final year at Durham, we had a real ding dong with Newcastle the entire season. We beat them at Rutherford. They beat us at the Head. Like, we sort of like exchanged blows the entire season. And then
they won Boat Race of the North.
We didn't do it. It was on its off years. I know. We had a big break in Boat Race of the North just as literally the years I joined. We just didn't do it because that was something to do with the city of Newcastle and sponsorship. I can't remember. Anyway, there's reasons we didn't do it. But I would race. I would be racing the cruise we raced at the time. We got a silver at Bucks to Newcastle. So like, I feel like that was the kind of, that was the standard at the time.
That race at Henley, yeah.
That race at Henley, us versus Newcastle. Yeah, because we weren't that far off. I think we were like half a length at Bucks. So
okay, but who's commentating?
I don't know. I didn't even whoever commentated before me. Like, I don't know who did the Bucks.
I mean, who was even there before you? I don't even know. No one knows.
I don't know. Whoever I took over from. But
that's awesome. I like that answer.
Definitely. If we can organise it with AI or something, Tom and I are going to take care of commentating.
I'm like, can we just organise like a row past for me at Henley Royal in my... Yeah.
We'll get there. We'll get there.
I'm sure there are some stewards listening to this, so make it happen.
Possibly. My question is, if you could travel back in time to the age you were when you first fell in love with rowing, what advice would you give your younger self?
I would give myself the advice to just enjoy it because it's just rowing. My mum used to say this to me all the time when I'd call her when I was at uni or when, like, this is so sad that I'm like, I'd say what my mum would say to me, but looking back at it now, it's so true. Like, I'd get so worked up that I'd not PB'd on a 30 rate 20 on a random Thursday in November. Like, and looking back at it now, I'm like, what significance does that hold in the rest of my life? Like, I shouldn't have let stuff have such a hold over me because it is everything at the time. You guys know this, right? Like, when you're an athlete and it is 80% of your week, you're going to training 12, 13, 14 times a week, and it does become your life. You treat it as such, like all of your problems are equivocal to that 80% of your life. And so it does become the worst thing in the world ever that you don't get that seat in that crew, or that you miss your PB, or whatever it is. And actually, I think I'd have had far more enjoyment if I'd have just kind of taken it as it was and done it, like, just kind of put those results to one side or contextualize them a lot, right? Like, there's always reasons why I might be tired or have lots on, and like, I would just ignore all of those factors and just focus on the thing that was in front of me, which is like, I've had a terrible result.
Yeah.
And I'd call my mum up in tears and she'd just go, Camilla, it's just rowing. Like, I can't remember any of my 30 rate 20 scores now. Like, I couldn't begin to tell you like what any of my scores were on any of my seat racing results. And yeah, I think when people are during their rowing career, even late on, right? Like, it is everything, and it is all of your problems and all of your achievements all in one. But finding balance outside of that and finding perspective and like actually just having it as the thing that you enjoy and you do it because you enjoy it. I think I've learned through growing up. So
amazing answer. And you're not the only person that gets old. The older I get, the more I realise my mum was right. And even listening to say, your mum saying like, oh, it's just rowing. I can hear like 15-year-old me going like, what do you mean it's just rowing? But like now I'm like, yeah, she was right. So some of these lessons you kind of have to go through to learn yourself that way. But I think, hopefully, from sharing this kind of experience, maybe some people will realise once they've heard enough people on this show go, do you know what? Like, I should have enjoyed it a bit more. Like,
and some of the best rowers that I've met are like people who have a sense of perspective, like the people that really just like see it as a thing that they enjoy, and they do the process in the moment that they're doing it and then put it to one side after they've finished it to focus on something else. Like, there are some amazing people who, I've met who are very, very good at rowing, but they're also really talented at a lot of other things. And it's because they can sort of like lock it up and go, do you know what? Like, I've done that process for that thing and that was the result. And I'll move on to the next process and I'll focus on the next like process to get to that result. But meanwhile, I'm actually going to go and do this thing over here. Like, you know, go and do a degree in something I love, or go and like having other hobbies. Like, I didn't think they existed when I was at uni. I was like, what are other hobbies? Like, this is my hobby and I love it and I'm going to do it all the time. But actually now I'm like, oh, you know, I really enjoy lots of other things in life. And yeah, I really respect that.
I remember at Nat Champs, which is like the last race at the end of school, I was in a crew with I was a lower sixth, but I was in a crew with a load of kids who were just going to finish school. And I just remember this kind of like strange conversation they were all having when like they were like, I used to like I might play basketball again next year, and like someone else being like, yeah, I remember I used to you know, like we're kind of like remembering this time before your entire life was rowing. They're like, I think I might do some other things next year.
Do you know what and this is me maybe getting very like, as you know, a little bit more deep into this topic, is that I think I went to state school, and like a lot of people that you come across in rowing, especially the UK, have discovered it through private school, which, you know, we all come to things in different ways. And I think one thing I found through interacting with people who've sort of grown up with that experience is, I think a lot of private schools, and maybe some state schools, but certainly it's more common in private schools, is more extracurricular activities and more balance is definitely drilled into you throughout your schooling life. Like, you're encouraged to not just pursue one thing, right? You're encouraged to be balanced, to be curious about other things around you, to not just take something and go with it. That, you know, you don't have to just be the rower or, you know, the pianist or whatever. That like you have this sense of like life outside of that one thing. And I think for me, I really enjoyed school. I liked my school, but it's definitely not as prevalent. That like, I don't know whether it's like a funding thing, but like there's just not as much available for you to do in the time frame that you've got with the resources that you have. And so yeah, I think it's important now looking back. I'm like, oh, I really wish that I'd had more opportunities to not just like do this one thing fully, because like I had to seek that outside of school. So like it felt like, okay, I have to commit to this because I'm spending time and money on this particular thing. Whereas, yeah, finding other things or having balance was very difficult, I think, when it's not quite as... I don't know, maybe that... I don't know whether that's legitimate to say. But,
yeah, it's your experience. And like, yeah, exactly. I can understand it. And potentially that sort of thing, like, right, this is the thing that's going to get me where I need to be. And yeah, you can kind of put too much into it. But then at the same time, you know, if you're going to get somewhere, you have to. So it just hinges on loving what you do, really.
I think also it's such a good piece of advice to have other hobbies that you also actively pursue, because you never know what transferable skills or lessons from those other hobbies you're going to take into your rowing. Or say you have a stress fracture, or you need to spend 6 months on the bike because your back's gone a little bit and you need to focus your mind on something else. If you're just going to think about the lack of rowing and not fill that void with anything else, is going to be a pretty dreading
wasn't experience. It Lola Anderson, she said, like, when she first got injured and was like, oh well, what do you do like to like de-stress? And she was like, well, usually I go rowing. Just like, so I had to find something else.
She got into baking, and then she just started bringing like loads of cupcakes and cakes to everyone like cover shop. So that was quite fun. But yeah, so I think obviously I have a different experience coming from Poland, where my rowing existed outside of my school. So I got to do rowing most evenings, but I would still sometimes try and make time to go and do like extracurricular things, like, you know, whether it be artsy or like some math societies or just like some other like either nerdy or not nerdy stuff. I think it's so important to also like have other friend groups that you can rely on, because sometimes you never know, things may turn a bit sour, or like you're not going to be one of those 26% of athletes that will decide when the end of your career is coming. So it's just good to leave yourself options. So that's really, really good piece of advice.
Yeah. And just have other things to talk about, you know, like in conversation. Yeah. I feel like if you're with a group of rowers, like talking about rowing is very easy, right? But like going into the working world, rowing becomes a very short conversation. And
I was supposed to know about
right? Like
500-meter split.
Exactly. So for the last however many years of my like working career now, like almost 10 years, I've had to find other interests that aren't rowing to talk to people about. And I don't watch Love Island or anything like that.
Oh my
So
God,
I mean, it leaves me with very limited conversation starters. So I'm like, what do you guys do outside of work? What can I get into?
But that's such a pro tip, because I was at university, when I was at university and I finished rowing in like the first year. For the next I did 3 more years after that, but not rowing. So there's something completely different. The friend groups that I've had then, they didn't know rowing. They've never been in the boat. Oh, it's like kayaking and things like that. Well, some of my housemates didn't know I used to row, like quite competitively, until like just mentioned it maybe like a year and a half later. Cause like you said, it's just good to just like not be so single dimensional. Brings me to my last question. Who are some of your rowing idols or people that you've looked up to either during or post your rowing career?
The really obvious one, but I have to say it because she's an absolute gem, is Catherine Granger. And I grew up in a time where London 2012 was like the biggest thing. You know, I was at university when 2012 was on. I was in my just finished my first year at university. So I was like prime, you know, motivation, prime idolization of somebody that, having started rowing in 2006, like Catherine Granger was like the biggest female rower, full stop, like in the GB rowing team. And just being able to witness her career over the span of like me starting in 06, like after she'd finished in Athens in 04, and then I remember watching Beijing. I remember, you know, obviously like going to 2012, and I watched Catherine's final with Anna in the double from the bathroom, because I was doing a summer job through sixth form, where I worked in a nursery and I wasn't allowed to have my phone on me or like anything. And so I kept my phone in a locker, and I remember I was like watching my watch and being like, right, okay, I need to go and watch this like London 2012 final. So I was like, I'm just going to go for a bathroom break, and I ran, grabbed my phone, sat in the toilet, watched, because I was so like, I just absolutely wanted to see her succeed. That, that is how I watched Anna and Catherine win their gold at 2012, was in the bathroom of my sixth form job, my summer sixth form job, because I wasn't allowed to just watch it on TV. But tying it into now, like Catherine obviously is a, you know, commentator at Henley. She's a pundit for the BBC. And she is honestly like the nicest, friendliest. Like she will always say hello. She will always stop and chat to you. Like she's just such an engaging person. And I think UK sport is in really good hands. And I just couldn't think of a better person to be a role model for our sport than somebody who has spanned over the disappointment, the elation, but also like the post-rowing life that she's had. Plus also like all of her studies alongside, right? Like what an amazing human being. So yeah, shout out to Catherine. I think she's awesome.
Amazing.
That's a brilliant answer. Yeah. We've managed to meet with her at Henley during the time that we were working as commentators. And yeah, it's just exactly like you said, like it's great to see icons be like also just like really nice, genuine human people in real life.
Yeah.
So yeah, cool. Camilla, thanks so much for this chat. I've really enjoyed the discussions that we've had and like the interesting points that you've brought out about like the world of commentary, but also your insights as an athlete and former athlete, and how you like look back on your career. I think that will all serve as a great lesson to the listeners, and I'm sure it's going to prompt some questions either in the comments or for you know, passerbys if they like stop you at the next event and say, oh yeah, I wanted to ask you about this and that. So this has been super fun to do, and at some point obviously would love to have you on the show again.
Oh, thank you so much, guys. I've really enjoyed it. This has been fantastic, and you've asked me some questions that I've never been asked before, so awesome. Kudos.
We did our job good too. But yeah, thanks. Awesome. Really, really good. Yeah. Really great. Like I said, to look behind the curtain, and awesome to hear about your experiences. And yeah, I'm sure we're going to hear you for many years to come. Maybe even work with you again, hopefully.
Yeah, that's the thing. I'm looking forward to working with you again in the future.
Yeah.
But as for today, this concludes everything for this episode. So on that note, easy there.
Cue the music.